Keisha sat on a cold, unforgiving park bench, the kind that was made of metal and seemed to be designed to suck every last bit of warmth right out of you. Her worn-out coat, a once bright red that was now faded to a dull, rusty color, was pulled so tight around her shoulders it felt like a second skin. Beside her, huddled close for whatever heat their tiny bodies could share, were her twin children, Joshua and Jada. They were just 8 years old, but their faces already held a wisdom far beyond their years, a quiet understanding of a world that had been anything but kind. Keisha was a black woman from Jamaica, and you could still hear the island's rhythm in her voice, especially when she was tired or emotional. Her skin was the color of rich coffee, and her eyes, deep brown and usually full of life, were now shadowed by exhaustion and worry. Her thick, dark hair was braided in simple twists that she'd done herself, a practical style that kept it neat but did little to keep her head warm in the sharp New York wind. She was just 35, but the weight of the past few years had etched fine lines around her eyes and mouth, telling a story of struggle that was visible for anyone who cared to look. The twins, Joshua and Jada, were a spitting image of their mother. Joshua had the same big, soulful eyes and a shy smile that rarely showed itself these days. Jada, his little sister by just a few minutes, had a mischievous glint in her eyes even when she was sleeping. They both had beautiful, dark skin and hair that was braided just like their mom's. Right now, though, their cheeks were flushed a rosy red from the biting cold, and their breath came out in little puffs of white smoke with every sigh. Joshua whimpered, a small sound that cut through the city noise. "Mommy, I'm so cold." Keisha's heart twisted. She wrapped an arm around him, pulling him against her side. "Shoo, baby boy," she whispered, her voice a soft melody against the harsh backdrop of the city. "Just a little longer. It's almost morning." Jada stirred, her small hand reaching out and finding her mom's. "Will we go home soon, Mommy?" she mumbled, her eyes still closed. "Soon, my sweet girl." "We will," Keisha said, her words a promise she wasn't sure she could keep. Her throat was tight with emotion. The words home and safe felt like things that belonged to another life, a different person. She remembered a time when her life was filled with sunshine, not this constant, gnawing darkness. She had come to America with a heart full of hope and a head full of dreams. She had left her small village in Jamaica behind, promising her family she would find a better life. She had worked so hard, cleaning houses and taking care of other people's children, saving every last penny. And then she met Michael. He was a white man with eyes the color of a clear summer sky and a smile that could melt the winter snow. He was a charming, smooth talker, a successful tech entrepreneur with a company that was supposed to be the next big thing. He had promised her the world, and for a while she had believed him. They had a whirlwind romance, and soon they were married. Michael was all she had in this new country, and she had given him her whole heart. When she found out she was pregnant with twins, it felt like a miracle. They named their babies Joshua and Jada, 2 beautiful names for their 2 beautiful children. Life was good. They lived in a nice house with a big garden, and Keisha thought she had finally found her fairy tale ending. But fairy tales, as she learned, were not for everyone. Michael's successful company was built on lies. The money he had flashed around, the fancy cars, the big house, it was all a house of cards. When the whole thing came crashing down, the government came looking for answers, and Michael, instead of facing the music, simply disappeared. One day, he was there, and the next, he was gone, leaving Keisha with 2 small children, a pile of debt she didn't understand, and a mountain of legal trouble that seemed impossible to climb. He had drained their shared bank accounts, leaving nothing behind but a note. Keisha still remembered the sight of his clean, neat handwriting on the paper, the words a knife to her heart. "I'm sorry. You're better off without me. Don't try to find me." Suddenly, she was a widow, a single mother, and a person with a massive financial burden. She lost the house, her car, and almost all her savings trying to pay off debts that weren't even her own. She went from living in a fancy mansion to a tiny apartment she could barely afford. But she kept working, cleaning houses and finding whatever small jobs she could get, all to keep her children fed and a roof over their heads. But with the bills and the debts piling up, It wasn't long before even that tiny apartment was taken away. She was out on the streets with nothing but the clothes on their backs. It's easy to judge someone's situation from the outside, but you never truly know their story. Keisha's pride, her quiet strength, is what has kept her going. If you've ever had to fight to keep your head above water, tell us your story in the comments below. Your strength might be the inspiration someone else needs. The twins had finally fallen into a deeper sleep, their breathing steady and quiet. Keisha watched them, her heart aching. The thought of begging for money, of holding out her hand to a stranger, filled her with a terrible shame. She had always been a hard worker, a proud woman. Her mother had taught her that you work for what you get in this life, you don't ask for handouts. But pride felt like a luxury she could no longer afford. Her stomach rumbled, a sharp, empty ache that had become a constant companion. She thought about a warm meal, a soft bed, a place where her children didn't have to shiver in the night. The thought was so powerful it felt like a physical pain. She pulled her knees up to her chest, resting her chin on them, and watched the cars zip by on the dark street. Each one was a blur of light and noise, a tiny world moving so fast, with people inside who had homes and warmth and food. The contrast was a slap in the face. She was so close to them, yet so far away. Just as she was about to close her eyes, her mind a dizzying mix of despair and exhaustion. A sleek, black car slowed down and pulled over right in front of them. It wasn't just any car. It was one of those fancy, super expensive ones with tinted windows. The engine hummed with a quiet power that felt like a challenge to the cold, still night. The passenger window rolled down slowly, and for a split second, a man's face was illuminated by the flickering light of the street lamp. Keisha's breath caught in her throat. She couldn't believe her eyes. It was a white man with dark, wavy hair and a strong jawline, dressed in an expensive suit. He looked just like the man she had loved. She blinked, forcing herself to focus. No, it wasn't him. The face was older, with lines of worry around his eyes that Michael never had. This man looked different, but his eyes, they were the same clear blue color as the summer sky. And then she saw the face of the man who had stepped out of the driver's side. He was a tall, handsome black man with a well-groomed beard and eyes that were a piercing shade of green. His suit was just as expensive as the passengers, but he wore it with an easy confidence. The headlights of the car hit them, blinding her for a moment, and as he walked around the front of the car, Keisha felt a jolt of recognition so strong it made her heart pound against her ribs. She couldn't place his name, but she knew that face. She had seen him before. She had seen him many times. The man stopped, looking from Keisha to the two sleeping children and back to her. A look of surprise, followed by something she couldn't quite read, crossed his face. And then he spoke, his voice deep and soft in the quiet night. "Keisha?" he said, the name a question and a statement at the same time. He knew her. But how? And from where? The cold had been so overwhelming. But now, a different kind of shiver, one of fear and a tiny spark of something else, ran down her spine. The man's eyes widened slightly as he took a step closer, his gaze falling on the children. And then he said it. "It's me, William. What are you doing here?" The night, which had been so dark and lonely, suddenly felt like it was about to break wide open. William Carter stood under the harsh light of the New York street lamp, the cold air suddenly feeling much colder. His expensive, dark blue suit felt like a costume, and his shoes, polished to a mirror shine, seemed completely out of place on the dirty pavement. He had spent the last 8 years building an empire of wealth and power, but none of it mattered in this moment. All that mattered was the woman on the bench in front of him, and the two small figures huddled against her. Keisha. The name felt like a prayer on his lips, a ghost from a past he had tried to bury. William was a tall, imposing man, but his usual confident posture was gone, replaced by a stunned stillness. His green eyes, so often seen in the glossy pages of business magazines, were wide with a mix of shock and a deep, gut-wrenching pain. His dark hair was perfectly styled, and his beard was neatly trimmed, but none of that could hide the raw emotion on his face. He was a white man, born and raised in the heart of Texas, but he had a worldly air about him now, the kind that came from private jets and international deals. Yet, here he was, staring at a woman he had once loved with all his heart, a woman he had left behind, a woman who was now a stranger on a cold street corner. The children, Joshua and Jada, stirred at the sound of his voice. They blinked their sleepy eyes, their gaze moving from their mother to the towering stranger with a concerned look. They saw him staring, their small faces filled with a mixture of confusion and fear. Jada's grip on her mother's hand tightened, and Joshua's little body pressed closer to Keisha. They were like two scared little birds, huddling together for protection, and the sight of them twisted a knife in William's heart. Keisha, still in a daze, felt her heart hammer against her ribs. The name, William, brought a flood of memories she had long since put away. A time of shared dreams and quiet laughter, of a love that had felt so simple and pure. She had come to America with a dream, and that dream had included him. He was a young man then, just starting out, with an intensity that had both thrilled and terrified her. They had met at a community center where she volunteered, and he had been there, a young student trying to make a difference in the world. They had fallen in love, a whirlwind romance that had defied their different backgrounds. But then he left. He had promised to return, but she had never heard from him again. She had waited for months, her heart breaking a little more with each passing day. She had believed in him, trusted him, and he had simply vanished. Now, years later, here he was. The boy she knew was gone, replaced by this man. A man with a powerful car and an expensive suit. He was so different, yet his eyes, those piercing green eyes, were exactly as she remembered. They held the same intensity, but now they were filled with a regret she could almost feel from where she sat. "Who are you?" Keisha's voice was barely a whisper, a broken plea that shook with a mix of fear and disbelief. The question was a lie, a defense mechanism to shield her from the pain of his betrayal and the humiliation of her present situation. She knew who he was, but the man she knew wouldn't have let this happen. The William she knew would have been a friend, a person who would have helped her when she needed it. This man, this stranger, was a symbol of all the lost potential and wasted hope in her life. William took another step closer, his eyes fixed on the twins. A wave of guilt so strong it made him dizzy crashed over him. He had been a fool, an arrogant, self-centered fool. When they had met, he was a student with big dreams, a kid with a burning desire to prove himself. Keisha was his rock, the only person who had ever truly seen him for who he was, not what he wanted to be. But he had been offered a chance, a scholarship that could catapult him into a world he had only ever dreamed of. It was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and in his desperation to seize it, he had left her behind. He had promised to call, to write, to come back for her, but he never did. The shame of his poverty and his ambition had been a toxic combination. He didn't want her to see the struggle he was going through, and he was too proud to admit he had nothing to offer her. So he had simply vanished, leaving her to face the world alone. He had always told himself that he had made the right decision, that he had done what he had to do. He had chased his dreams and achieved them, but at what cost? He looked at Keisha, at her haunted eyes and her tired face, and he knew the answer. The cost was too high. The twins whimpered, and Keisha pulled them tighter. "Stay away from us," she said, her voice a little stronger this time, the pride she had been holding on to for so long finally breaking through the desperation. The children clung to her, their small bodies a silent protest against the man who had intruded on their dark, cold world. The man in the car, a middle-aged white man with a serious face and salt and pepper hair, watched the scene with a quiet intensity. He was William's lawyer, Mark, a man who had seen William through countless business deals and legal battles. He had never seen his client look so vulnerable, so completely shattered. "William," Mark said, his voice quiet, a gentle reminder that they were on a public street. But William didn't hear him. All he could hear was the frantic beating of his own heart and the memories of a life that could have been. He remembered the night he left, the way Keisha had smiled at him, her beautiful face lit by the moonlight, so full of trust. He had betrayed that trust, and for what? A life of hollow victories and a loneliness no amount of money could fix. He took another step, his heart pounding in his chest. Keisha, please. It's me, William. What happened to you? She shook her head, tears finally welling in her eyes, tears she had fought so hard to hold back. You can't just show up like this, she said, her voice breaking. After all this time, after everything. She couldn't finish the sentence. The humiliation was too much. The years of struggle, the cold nights, the hungry children. All of it felt so much worse with him standing there, a symbol of all the things she had lost. William's eyes fell to the children again, and a new wave of realization hit him. They had her eyes, her smile. But there was something else, something familiar in their faces, something in the way they held themselves. It was in the shape of their noses, the curve of their chin. A deep, impossible hope began to stir in his chest, a feeling so terrifying and wonderful that it took his breath away. The math was simple. They were the right age. The pieces of the puzzle he hadn't known he was missing suddenly began to snap into place. He looked at Keisha, at her beautiful, weary face, and he knew he had to do something. He couldn't just stand there, a ghost from her past. He had to act. He reached into his coat pocket, his hands shaking slightly, and pulled out his wallet. Keisha flinched, her eyes widening in fear, as if she thought he was going to offer her charity. Her pride rose up like a shield, and she recoiled, her body language saying, "Don't you dare." "Keisha," he said, his voice full of a desperate, pleading sincerity. "I am so sorry. Please, just let me help. I can't leave you out here like this." But the cold, the hunger, and the exhaustion were no match for the pain and betrayal she felt. She stood up slowly, holding her children close, her eyes blazing with a mixture of fury and heartbreak. "We don't need your help," she said, the words a raw, sharp edge in the quiet night. She turned away from him, her back straight with a dignity that was more powerful than all his money and success. She began to walk away, her two little ones stumbling along with her, clinging to her coat. The thought of her walking back into the darkness, with the twins by her side, was more than William could bear. He ran after her, his expensive shoes slapping against the pavement. He couldn't let her go. Not again. He reached out and gently touched her shoulder. "Please, Keisha, don't leave. The children, are they?" He trailed off, his voice thick with emotion. Keisha stopped, her body trembling. She didn't turn around, but her voice was strong, though it broke with a fresh wave of tears. "They are my children," she said. And then, she added the words that felt like a knife in his gut. "They are my life. And you have no part in it." The words were an icy blade that cut through his heart, a final act of justice for all the years he had abandoned her. But as she said it, a lone tear slipped down her cheek, and the two children, sensing their mother's pain, turned to look at him, their little faces full of a question he knew he had to answer. He didn't know what to say, what to do. He just stood there, his heart breaking for a family he never knew he had. The cold night seemed to hold its breath. Keisha stood frozen on the sidewalk, her back still to William, her body a shield for her children. His words, "The children, are they?" echoed in her mind. He was asking the question she had known was coming, the one that had haunted her for years. The sound of his voice, so full of a broken hope, made her want to run and never look back. But her feet were planted to the pavement. William took a cautious step forward, his hands held out in a silent plea. "Keisha, please, look at me." When she didn't turn, he walked around her, slowly, until he was standing right in front of her. The street lamp cast a soft, yellow light on his face, illuminating the worry in his eyes. He knelt down on one knee, bringing himself closer to her level, and to the children who were now peeking out from behind her legs. "Keisha," he said again, his voice gentle and low, "I swear to you I didn't know. I never knew you were pregnant." The words hit her like a punch. "You didn't know?" she repeated, her voice laced with a bitter disbelief. "You just left. You left me with nothing. You think I'm going to believe you didn't know?" Her voice was full of a fiery anger, a heat that had been building inside her for 8 long years. "Joshua," sensing the change in his mother's tone, tightened his grip on her coat. Jada, however, peeked out and took a timid step forward, her eyes wide with curiosity. She wasn't hiding anymore. She was just looking at him, a tall man in a suit, with a face that looked so much like her own. William's eyes softened as he looked at the little girl. He saw her face, her curious eyes, and it was like looking into a mirror of his own past. He saw himself, a young boy with big dreams and a heart full of hope. The sight of her, so small and vulnerable, filled him with a powerful ache. "Keisha, listen to me," he said, his voice pleading. "When I left, it wasn't because I wanted to. I was scared. I was a broke college kid with a whole lot of big ideas and nothing to show for it. I was so ashamed of my family's situation, and I felt I wasn't worthy of your love and loyalty. A friend, Gregory, told me there was a chance to get into a big business program. He said it was a one-in-a-million opportunity, that it would change my life forever. He told me he'd take care of everything, that he'd explain everything to you. He promised me he'd tell you I loved you, that I'd be back for you." As he spoke, a new memory, a dark and painful one, surfaced in his mind. He was sitting in a coffee shop with Gregory, a man he had trusted like a brother. Gregory had been his go-to for everything, his business mentor, his confidant, and his only true friend at that time. Gregory was a short man, skinny, with a sly look in his eyes and a way of making you feel like he always knew more than you did. He was a master of manipulation, but William had been too naive to see it then. Gregory had talked to him about his passion, his dreams of building a big tech company. He had always been so good with computers, so good at coming up with new ideas. But he had no money, no connections, and no way to make his dreams a reality. Gregory, however, had the resources and the connections he needed. He had offered William a deal. He would get him into a top-tier business program, fund his startup, and give him the opportunity to become a billionaire. The only catch, he had to leave everything behind. He had to disappear from his old life and focus entirely on his new one. William had told Gregory about Keisha. He told him about their love, about their plans for the future. He had told him he couldn't just leave her. But Gregory, with his sly smile, had said, "What good is love if you can't provide for the person you love? Go, build your empire, and when you're a man of worth, you'll be able to give her the life she deserves. I'll make sure she understands. I'll tell her everything." William had believed him. He had been so young, so foolish, so hungry for success. He had believed that Gregory would do the right thing, that he would tell Keisha his side of the story. But he hadn't. He hadn't told her anything. Keisha's eyes, full of tears and fury, watched him as he spoke. "You trusted a man with our relationship?" she asked, her voice shaking with disbelief. "You left me in the dark, with no word, no note, no explanation, and you expect me to believe you didn't know? I didn't. I swear on my life, Keisha. I had no idea," he insisted, his voice cracking with emotion. "I tried to call you 1,000,000 times. I came back, and your number was disconnected, and your apartment was gone. I hired people to find you, but they couldn't. I thought you had just moved on." He looked at the twins, his gaze filled with a father's pain. "I thought you had found someone else. I never imagined you were pregnant. Why didn't you tell me, Keisha? Why didn't you come looking for me? How could I?" she snapped, the raw hurt in her voice almost palpable. "I was a young woman, pregnant and alone. I had no one. You were gone. I didn't even know where you were. I lost my job, my apartment, everything. I had no choice but to start over, to fight for my children's lives." Her voice broke, and she turned away, unable to look at him anymore. Joshua, now fully awake and aware of the tension, took another cautious step forward. He looked at his mother, at her tear-streaked face, and then at the strange man kneeling on the ground. He had a strong feeling that this man had something to do with the sadness in his mother's eyes. He took a few more steps, his small body a mix of fear and curiosity, until he was standing right in front of William. William froze, his heart in his throat. He looked at the boy, his son, and a wave of emotion so powerful it made him dizzy crashed over him. Joshua had his eyes, the exact same shade of green, and his curly, dark hair. It was like looking at a miniature version of himself. He reached out a trembling hand, and for a moment, he was afraid the boy would pull away. But Joshua didn't. He just stood there, watching him, a silent question in his eyes. William gently touched the boy's cheek, his callous thumb brushing against his soft, cold skin. A single tear slipped from his eye and rolled down his cheek. "Joshua," he whispered, the name a sacred thing on his lips. "You have my eyes." Jada, emboldened by her brother's bravery, now came out from behind her mother and looked at William with the same intensity. She had her mother's eyes, her gentle spirit, but there was a strength in her that reminded him of himself. He reached out to her and she too didn't flinch. He touched her cheek, her skin just as soft and cold as her brother's. The sight of their faces, their small bodies shivering in the cold, was too much for him to bear. He stood up, his heart pounding with a mix of grief and gratitude. "Keisha, please, you can't stay out here. The children are freezing. Just let me get you a warm place for the night. A hotel. A place to get a warm meal. I won't ask for anything else. I won't intrude. Just let me do this. For them. For their sake." He looked at her, his eyes pleading, his voice full of a desperate sincerity. He wasn't asking for her forgiveness. He was begging for a chance to do something, anything to make things right. He wanted to give them a safe place for the night, a moment of peace, a respite from the cruel reality of the street. Keisha stood there, torn. Her pride, that fierce, unbending wall she had built around herself, was battling with the simple, desperate need to protect her children. She looked from the billionaire to her shivering twins. They were her whole world. Their little bodies trembled with cold, and their faces were pale with exhaustion. She could continue to be strong, to be proud, and walk away. But what would that mean for them? Another night on a cold park bench? Another night of hunger and fear? She thought about the future she had envisioned, the life she had dreamed of giving them. Felt so far away now, so impossible. Her heart ached for a moment of comfort, a single night of peace. She looked at William, at the genuine pain in his eyes. He wasn't the arrogant, self-centered man she had imagined him to be. He was just a man, a broken man, standing in front of his lost family. She looked at Joshua and Jada, their small faces turned up to hers, their eyes silently begging for a little bit of warmth. The sight of them, her brave, beautiful children, was all the strength she needed. She took a deep breath, the cold air filling her lungs, and she made a choice. A choice not of pride, but of survival. "Just for one night," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Just for them." William's face was a mixture of relief and gratitude. He quickly motioned for the man in the car, his lawyer, to get out and help. The lawyer, a man named Mark, looked at William, his face a mask of concern, and then at Keisha, and he knew, without a single word being said, that this was going to be a long, complicated night. But for now, for this one night, the cold was a little less biting, and a small glimmer of hope, like a tiny star in a dark sky, began to shine. Keisha's yes hung in the cold night air, a fragile word that was barely a sound. It was a surrender not to William, but to the deep, primal instinct to protect her children. The sight of their shivering bodies was a pain far greater than any pride she held. She took a breath, the cold air burning her lungs, and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. William's face was a mixture of relief and gratitude, as if she had just given him a priceless gift. He didn't push, didn't say a single word. He simply gestured for his lawyer, Mark, to get out of the car. Mark, a kind man with a tired look in his eyes, walked over to them. His face was a mask of concern, and he looked at William with a silent question. William just shook his head slightly, letting Mark know that he was in charge. Mark opened the back door of the sleek black car, and the soft, inviting glow of the interior light spilled out onto the dark street. Keisha hesitated for a moment. This car, this man, this whole situation felt like a dream. A dangerous, beautiful dream, but her children were her reality. She looked down at Joshua and Jada, their small faces pale and weary. She knelt down, wrapping an arm around each of them. "Come on, babies," she whispered. "We're going to get warm, just for one night." Joshua, his little eyes full of a quiet hope, looked at his mother, and then at William. He seemed to understand, in a way only a child can, that this man was their only chance at warmth. Jada, however, was a little more hesitant. She looked at the big, expensive car, and then at her mother, her little brow furrowed in confusion. Keisha gently took her hand, and Joshua took her other, and together, the three of them moved toward the car, a silent, fragile procession. William stood back, giving them space. He watched as Keisha helped the children into the car, her movements slow and careful. She got in after them, pulling the door shut with a quiet click. He looked at Mark, his heart pounding in his chest. "Get us to the Plaza Hotel," he said, his voice a little hoarse. "And get them a room, a big one, with 2 beds, kitchen, anything they need." Mark nodded, his face still unreadable, and he got into the driver's seat. William got in on the other side, and the car pulled away from the curb, leaving the cold, desolate street behind. Inside the car, the warmth was like a physical presence. It wrapped around the twins, making them sigh in relief. The rich, leather seats were soft and comfortable, and the quiet hum of the engine was a gentle lullaby. Joshua leaned his head against the window, his little face pressed against the cool glass, and he just watched the city lights fly by. He had never been in a car this nice before. He had never been so warm. Jada, still holding her mother's hand, was a little more curious. She looked at William, a silent question in her eyes. William, feeling her gaze on him, tried to offer a small, reassuring smile. He didn't know what to say. He was a man who had built a billion-dollar company out of nothing, a man who had spoken to presidents and CEOs, but he was completely lost. His mind was a jumble of emotions: guilt, regret, and a powerful, overwhelming love for the children he had just found. He looked at Keisha, who was staring straight ahead, her face a blank mask. He wanted to reach out, to touch her hand, to tell her how sorry he was. But he knew it was too soon. The chasm between them was too wide, filled with years of pain and betrayal. So he just sat there, in a comfortable silence, and let the warmth of the car do the talking. When they arrived at the hotel, a beautiful old-fashioned place with a big, grand entrance, the doorman, dressed in a sharp uniform, opened the door for them. The lobby was a symphony of warmth and light. The air smelled of wood smoke and rich, earthy perfumes. There was a big, roaring fireplace in the corner, and the soft, inviting couches were a beautiful sight. Keisha felt a powerful wave of emotion wash over her. It was a feeling she hadn't felt in a very long time, a feeling of being safe. It was a feeling that made her want to cry and laugh at the same time. She looked at her children, their eyes wide with wonder, and she felt a small, powerful spark of joy ignite in her heart. Mark, the lawyer, went to the front desk and quickly got them a beautiful suite on a high floor. When the elevator doors opened, the children gasped. The suite was huge, with a living room, a dining area, and 2 separate bedrooms. There was a big, plush couch and a flat-screen TV on the wall. The windows overlooked the glittering city, a million tiny lights sparkling like a blanket of stars. Keisha looked around, her mind reeling. It had been so long since she had been in a place like this. The last time she had seen a room this nice, it had been the home she had shared with Michael. The memory was a sharp, painful one, a reminder of a life that had been so full of promise, and then had been taken away. She pushed the thought away, focusing on her children. Joshua ran over to the window, his little hand pressed against the cool glass. "Mommy, look," he said, his voice full of excitement. "It's a Christmas tree." He pointed to the Christmas tree in the square below. It was a beautiful tree, covered in a million tiny lights, and it was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. Jada, her curiosity finally winning over her fear, went over to the fireplace. She put her hand out, her fingers dancing in the warmth. The sight of her, so full of joy, filled Keisha's heart with a powerful love. William stood in the doorway watching them. He saw the way the twins' faces lit up at the sight of the room. He saw the small, genuine smile that appeared on Keisha's face. He knew he had done the right thing. It wasn't about the money. It wasn't about the luxury. It was about seeing her, and the children, finally have a moment of peace. He walked over to the dining table and pulled out a chair for Keisha. "Sit down," he said, his voice gentle. "I'll order some food, whatever you want." Keisha looked at him, her heart in her eyes. She wanted to say no. She wanted to tell him she didn't need his help. But her stomach rumbled, a sharp reminder of her hunger. And she knew the children were starving. So she just nodded and sat down. William pulled out his phone and made a quick call. A few minutes later, a hotel employee arrived with a huge cart full of food. There was pasta, chicken, fresh bread, and a huge bowl of salad. The smell of the food filled the room, making their stomachs growl. Keisha helped the twins, her hands trembling as she put the food on their plates. They ate quickly, their little bodies finally getting the nourishment they desperately needed. As the children ate, Keisha watched William. He was sitting on the other side of the table, his eyes fixed on the twins, a soft smile on his face. He wasn't the arrogant, self-centered man she had imagined him to be. He was just a broken man who seemed to be trying to make things right. But could he really make up for all the years of pain and struggle? After the children had eaten, they went to one of the bedrooms and fell into a deep sleep, their little bodies finally getting the rest they so desperately needed. Keisha sat in the living room, watching the city lights, her mind a jumble of thoughts. The room was so quiet, so peaceful. It was a world away from the cold, lonely street. William came and sat down on the couch next to her. The silence between them was not a comfortable one. It was a silence filled with unspoken questions and unhealed wounds. He finally broke the silence. "I'm sorry, Keisha," he said, his voice low and sincere. "I am so sorry for everything." Keisha didn't say anything. She just looked at him, her eyes full of a powerful, painful emotion. He had apologized before, but it had felt like a hollow gesture. This time it felt different, felt real. She knew he was telling the truth. She knew he hadn't meant to hurt her, but it didn't change the fact that he had. She looked away from him, her gaze falling on the glittering city below. The lights seemed so close, and yet so far away. It was a world she had once dreamed of, a world she had been so close to, a world that had been taken away from her. She had been on a fragile, broken path, and now, here she was, in a beautiful, warm place, a place that felt like a dream. But she knew that dreams were not meant to last. Her mind was a jumble of emotions. Gratitude for the warmth, for the food, for the safety, but also fear. A deep, powerful fear that this was all just a temporary fix. A fear that he would leave again, that he would vanish just like before. Her mind screamed at her to leave, to get back to the familiar, if painful, reality of her life. But her heart, a small, hopeful part of her heart, wanted to believe that this time, just this one time, it would be different. She looked at him, a silent question in her eyes, a question she was afraid to ask out loud. "Will you leave us again?" The quiet of the hotel suite was a beautiful thing. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, the air wasn't filled with the sounds of traffic or the chatter of strangers. It was just the gentle hum of the building and the quiet breathing of her sleeping children. Keisha sat on the plush couch watching William. He had gone into the children's room and was sitting on the floor, his back against the bed, reading a story to a sleeping Joshua and Jada. His deep voice, a low rumble that was so different from her own, was a soothing sound. She watched him, and a memory, a warm, soft one, came to her. She remembered a different time, a different place. She and William were sitting on a rickety old couch in his tiny college apartment. He had a textbook in his lap, and she was in his arms, her head resting on his shoulder. He was reading to her not a story but a technical book about computers. He was explaining things to her, breaking down the difficult words into simple, easy-to-understand ideas. He had this way of making even the most complex things sound like a bedtime story. and he had a gentle, patient hand that would stroke her hair while he talked. She had loved that about him, his ability to be both brilliant and gentle at the same time. And now, here he was, doing the same thing. His voice was a soft, steady rhythm, and he was patient and kind. He wasn't the powerful billionaire the world knew. He was just a man, a tired man, reading a story to his children. He finished the story, and he gently placed the book on the nightstand. He reached out and tucked the blanket around Joshua, and then he did the same for Jada. He stood up slowly, his body stiff from sitting on the floor, and he just stood there for a moment, watching them, his face full of a powerful, overwhelming love. Keisha's heart ached for him. She saw the pain in his eyes, the deep regret that seemed to live in the lines around his mouth. He had lost so much time, and it was all her fault. No, she corrected herself. It was Gregory's fault. Gregory, that snake in the grass, that friend he had trusted. She remembered him now, the short, skinny man with the shifty eyes. She had never liked him. He had always made her feel uncomfortable, as if he were hiding a secret. She never knew what it was, but now she did. He was a liar, a cruel, heartless liar who had destroyed her relationship with the man she loved. She felt a surge of fury, a hot, angry feeling that made her want to scream, but she held it in. She was a mother, a protector. She had to be strong. William came out of the room, closing the door softly behind him. He looked at her, and his face was a mixture of concern and uncertainty. He walked over to the couch and sat down on the other end, leaving a wide space between them. The silence was a quiet hum, a delicate thing that neither of them wanted to break. "They're beautiful, Keisha," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "They look so much like you." She didn't say anything. She just nodded, her eyes fixed on the distant city lights. He had said that Joshua had his eyes, and she had seen it. The same deep green, the same quiet intensity. It was an undeniable truth. They were a part of him, a part of her. They were a beautiful, living reminder of the love that had been lost and found. "I'm sorry, Keisha," he said again, his voice filled with a powerful regret. "I should have come back for you. I should have tried harder to find you." "You did try," she said, her voice a little shaky. "You said you did." "I did, but I should have done more. I should have come back sooner. I shouldn't have listened to Gregory." "He was your friend," she said, the words a bitter taste in her mouth. "You trusted him." "I was a fool," he said, his voice full of a deep self-hatred. "I was so hungry for success, so desperate to prove myself, that I didn't see what was right in front of me. I had everything I ever wanted, and I just let it go." He was a successful, handsome, and wealthy man now. He had the world at his feet, but he had no one to share it with. He was a king in a kingdom of his own making, but he was a lonely king. The thought of it, of his loneliness, made her heart ache. She had been lonely too, but she had her children. She had Joshua and Jada, her whole world. He had nothing. She looked at him, and she saw the man she had loved so many years ago. The kind, gentle, and ambitious man who had won her heart. He was still there, under all the expensive clothes and the polished demeanor. He was still there, broken and lost, just like her. She found herself, in a moment of weakness, reaching out her hand and placing it on his arm. His skin was warm and his muscles were tense, but he didn't pull away. He looked at her, and his eyes, those beautiful green eyes, were full of a silent question. She didn't know what she was doing. It was an impulsive act, a moment of weakness that she knew she would regret. But she couldn't help herself. She wanted to feel his warmth, his presence. She wanted to know that he was real, that he wasn't a dream. "I was so angry at you," she said, her voice a little choked up. "For so long, I hated you. I hated you for leaving me, for leaving us." "I know," he said, his voice a low, pained sound. "And you have every right to. I am so sorry, Keisha. I am so sorry." His hand came up and covered hers, and the warmth of his touch was a powerful, comforting feeling. She didn't pull away. She just sat there, in the quiet of the night, and let the warmth seep into her. They sat there for a long time, not talking, just being. The silence was no longer uncomfortable. It was a peaceful, healing silence. It was a silence that was filled with unspoken words, with unhealed wounds, with the promise of a future that was so uncertain, but so full of a fragile, beautiful hope. Keisha looked at him, and she saw the way his face was illuminated by the soft light of the city. He looked tired, exhausted, and yet, there was a peace in his eyes she hadn't seen before. He had found something he had been looking for, and she knew, with a certainty that was both terrifying and wonderful, that he had found it in her. She thought about the life she had been living, the struggle, the pain, the loneliness, and she thought about this moment of peace, this moment of comfort. She knew that it wouldn't last forever. She knew that he would leave again. He had to. He had a life, a world, a billion-dollar company to run. He couldn't just stay here forever. But for now, for this one night, she was safe. Her children were safe. And that was all that mattered. She watched him, her eyes tracing the lines on his face. He had changed so much. But he was still the same person she had loved so many years ago. The thought of it, of her love for him, was a powerful, overwhelming emotion. She had never stopped loving him. She had just buried the love, deep inside her heart, under layers of pain and resentment. But now it was bubbling up, a small, fragile thing, but a powerful one nonetheless. She looked at him and he looked back at her. The silence was broken by the sound of a small smile. A tiny, almost imperceptible thing, but it was there, and it was on her face. A small, genuine smile that she hadn't felt in a very long time. It was a small crack in her emotional wall, a tiny break in the armor she had worn for so long. And it was a beautiful, terrifying thing. The beautiful, soft smile that had cracked through Keisha's tough shell faded as William rose from the couch, his phone buzzing with a new message. She watched as his face, which had been so soft and full of emotion just a moment ago, hardened. He looked down at the screen, and a frown creased his brow. The man from her past, the kind, gentle man who had sat with her and held her hand, was gone, replaced by the billionaire CEO she had seen in magazines. The transition was so quick, so jarring, that it made her heart sink. She was right. This was just a temporary thing. He had a life, a world she wasn't a part of, and he would leave. William looked up from his phone, his eyes still a little hard, and a silent apology passed between them. He walked over to the windows, his phone still in his hand, and stared out at the glittering city. Keisha didn't know what the message said, but she knew it was important. It was a call to a world she didn't know, a world of business and money and power. She watched him, her heart aching for the boy he used to be, the boy who had nothing but big dreams and a heart full of love. Now, he had everything, but he had lost so much along the way. She felt a familiar fear creeping into her heart. The fear that this was all just a moment in time, a dream she would wake up from. Meanwhile, across town, in a sleek, modern apartment that looked like it belonged on the cover of a magazine, a man named Gregory Miles sat at a huge, glass desk. He was a man in his late 30s, thin and wiry, with a sharp, pointed face and eyes that seemed to miss nothing. He was dressed in a simple but expensive-looking black turtleneck and a pair of dark slacks. He was a man who preferred to stay in the shadows, a man who pulled the strings behind the scenes. He had been William's business partner for years, the man who had been the architect of his success. But Gregory wasn't a friend. He was a rival, a man who was eaten up by a powerful, all-consuming jealousy. He had always been second to William. In college, William had been the one with the big ideas, the one with the natural talent. Gregory had the business sense, the connections, but he lacked the spark, the fire that William had. He had always been in William's shadow, and he hated it. He hated that William was the one who got all the glory, the one who was celebrated. He had worked just as hard, just as long, but he was always the one in the background. He looked at his computer screen, which was filled with graphs and charts and numbers, and a small, bitter smile touched his lips. He had done his work. He had made William a billionaire. But he had never forgotten the humiliation of being second best. He had never forgotten the girl William had loved. He had never forgotten Keisha. When William had confided in him about Keisha, a tiny, poisonous seed of an idea had been planted in Gregory's mind. He had seen an opportunity. He knew William was a man who loved deeply, a man who would do anything for the woman he loved. And Gregory knew that a woman could be a man's greatest strength or his greatest weakness. So, when William had left for the business program, Gregory had done something terrible. He hadn't just not given Keisha the message. He had done something far worse. He had told her a pack of lies. He had gone to her and told her that William had met someone else, a wealthy, white woman who could help him in his business career. He had painted a picture of William as a heartless, cold man who had simply used her and then tossed her aside. He had used her trust, her love, and her loyalty against her. He had hurt her, and he had broken her heart. And he had done the same to William. He had told William that Keisha had been seeing someone else, that she had simply moved on and forgotten about him. He had told him that she had called him a fool for leaving and that she had never truly loved him. He had convinced William that Keisha was a gold digger who was only with him for his future wealth, and he had planted a seed of mistrust in his mind. He had used William's ambition and his pride against him. He had orchestrated the whole thing. The misunderstanding, the pain, the betrayal. He had been the one pulling the strings, a puppet master in a tragic play. And he had enjoyed every minute of it. It was a twisted, cruel game, and he had won. He had driven a wedge between the two of them, a wedge that had lasted for 8 long years. Now, as he sat in his sleek, modern apartment, he looked at his computer screen, his eyes gleaming with a malicious satisfaction. He had a picture of William on the screen, a picture of him standing on the street with Keisha and the 2 children. He had a private investigator on William for years, a man who had been following his every move. He knew everything about William's life, every secret, every weakness. He knew about the girl he had left behind, and he knew about the family he didn't know he had. A small, evil smile played on his lips. This was the moment he had been waiting for, the moment he could finally get his revenge. He had made William a billionaire, and now he was going to take it all away. He picked up his phone, his hands trembling with a sick excitement. He had already set things in motion. He had been working in the shadows, moving money around, making deals, and building his own army of allies. He had been planning this for years, waiting for the right moment to strike. And now that moment was here. He made a call, his voice low and full of a cold, menacing purpose. "It's time," he said, the words a quiet whisper. "We're going to make him pay for what should have been mine." The words hung in the air, an ominous shadow that stretched across the city. Keisha and William were just beginning to mend their broken past, to heal the wounds that had been festering for so long. But they had no idea that an invisible enemy was plotting, a man who had been watching them from the shadows, a man who was ready to destroy everything they had just found. The game was about to begin, and this time there would be no going back. The morning after the cold night was a world away from the painful reality Keisha had been living. The hotel room was a haven of soft blankets, a warm, inviting glow, and the smell of fresh coffee and pastries. William had a big breakfast sent up for the 4 of them, a feast of eggs, bacon, and fluffy pancakes that the twins devoured with a hunger that made Keisha's heart ache. They ate and laughed. Their small faces lit up with a joy that she hadn't seen in a very long time. William watched them, a small, grateful smile on his face. He was dressed in a simple pair of dark jeans and a comfortable sweater, a stark contrast to the fancy suit from the night before. He looked younger, more relaxed, and more like the man she remembered. He was patient and kind with the children, cutting their pancakes into small, manageable pieces and pouring their juice. He didn't ask a lot of questions. He just watched them, his eyes full of a quiet wonder. Keisha watched him, her heart a jumble of emotions. She was still guarded, still holding on to the pain and resentment of the past, but it was getting harder to keep that wall up. She saw the genuine love in his eyes when he looked at the children, the way his face lit up when Joshua told him a story about a superhero, and the way he laughed at Jada's silly jokes. He was a natural father, a loving, kind man, and it was a difficult thing to reconcile with the man who had left her. Later that afternoon, William suggested they all go out for dinner. He wanted to take them to a nice restaurant, a place where they could all relax and have a good time. Keisha was hesitant. She was used to being invisible, to blending into the background. The thought of being in a fancy restaurant with a man like William, with a man who was so famous, made her nervous. But the twins, their eyes wide with excitement, begged her to say yes. How could she say no? She chose an outfit from a shopping bag that Mark had dropped off earlier that morning. It was a simple, beautiful black dress that hugged her curves and made her feel, for the first time in a very long time, elegant and beautiful. She did her hair, braiding it into a loose, comfortable style, and she put on a little bit of makeup. When she walked out of the bedroom, William just stared. His eyes, those beautiful green eyes, were full of a powerful, unspoken admiration. They took a taxi to the restaurant, a beautiful place with big, sparkling chandeliers and soft, romantic music playing in the background. The restaurant was filled with people, all of them dressed in beautiful clothes, and all of them looking important. Keisha felt a familiar wave of anxiety wash over her. She felt like an outsider, a person who didn't belong. But William was there, and he was a rock, a strong, calm presence that made her feel a little safer. They were seated at a quiet, secluded table in the back of the restaurant. As they ate, William told them stories about his childhood, about growing up on a farm in Texas, about the time he tried to ride a bull and broke his arm. The children laughed. Their little faces lit up with joy, and Keisha found herself smiling. She hadn't smiled like this in a very long time. It was a small, fragile thing, but it was there. But as the night wore on, a new kind of tension began to build. Keisha noticed people looking at them, whispering behind their hands. She saw a few people with cameras, their phones pointed in their direction. It was a subtle thing, but it was there. The quiet world she had been living in, the world of struggle and invisibility, was gone, replaced by this new public world. The twins, however, were completely oblivious. They were just happy. They were eating delicious food, they were with their mother, and they were with this kind, funny man who made them laugh. Joshua was telling William a story about a spaceship he had built out of cardboard boxes, and Jada was drawing on a napkin with a crayon, showing William her masterpiece. William was completely engrossed in their conversation. He was laughing, asking questions, and truly listening to them. He was a father, a real father, and it was a beautiful, heartwarming thing to watch. Keisha saw the way his eyes lit up, the way he leaned in to hear them better. She saw the powerful, unconditional love he had for them, a love he hadn't even known existed until the night before. And in that moment, her last bit of anger, her last bit of resentment, just melted away. She saw him not as the man who had betrayed her, but as the man who was just as much a victim as she was. He had been lied to, he had been manipulated, and he had lost so much just like her. She found herself, in a moment of pure, unadulterated joy, smiling. A real smile. It wasn't the small, fragile thing from before. It was a full-on, genuine, ear-to-ear grin. She was happy. Her children were happy. And in that moment, that was all that mattered. But as she smiled, as she felt the warmth of his presence and the love of her children, a small, dark shadow loomed in the background. A man, sitting at a table across the restaurant, had his phone up, a powerful zoom lens attached to it. He was a nondescript man, a face that would be forgotten a moment after you looked at it. He was a spy, and he was working for Gregory. He had been watching them all night, documenting their every move, their every smile, their every laugh. He snapped a picture of William and Keisha, their faces lit up with a small, fragile happiness, and he sent it to Gregory, along with a short, typed message. They're bonding. He's happy. He's starting to care. The message was a simple one, but it was a ticking time bomb. The media, the public, the world. It was all about to come crashing down on them. The fragile shelter they had built was about to be destroyed. Gregory's plan was in motion, and the danger was only just beginning. The beautiful, fragile peace of the previous night was shattered by the harsh, unrelenting light of morning. Keisha woke to the sound of her phone buzzing relentlessly on the nightstand. It was a sound she had learned to dread, a signal of bad news. But she was in a warm bed, in a beautiful hotel room, and for a moment, she allowed herself to believe that it was all a mistake, a harmless text message from a friend. She reached for the phone, her heart a little lighter than it had been in a very long time. But the moment she unlocked it, a wave of cold dread washed over her. The screen was flooded with notifications, with messages from people she hadn't spoken to in years, with news alerts and headlines that screamed her name. She clicked on a news notification from her phone's news app, and the headline was a punch to the gut. Billionaire's secret family revealed. William Carter's shocking past surfaces. Below the headline, a series of pictures were displayed. Pictures of her and William at the restaurant, laughing. Pictures of William holding Jada's hand. Pictures of him smiling at Joshua. Pictures of a family. Her heart pounded in her chest, a frantic drum against her ribs. She was so focused on the screen that she didn't hear the bedroom door open. William walked in, a tray of coffee and pastries in his hands, a soft, morning smile on his face. He saw her, her face pale and her eyes wide with a terrible fear, and his smile dropped. He placed the tray on the dresser and walked over to her, his face a mask of concern. "Keisha? What is it? What's wrong?" he asked, his voice low and concerned. She didn't say a word. She just held the phone out to him, her hand trembling. He took it from her, his face serious, and he read the headlines. As he scrolled through the pictures, his jaw tightened, and his eyes, those beautiful green eyes, filled with a cold, powerful fury. He knew what this was. He knew who was behind it. Gregory. It had to be. "I am so sorry, Keisha," he said, his voice a low, gravelly sound. "I swear to you, I had no idea this was going to happen. This is a complete violation. It's a violation of your privacy and the children's, and I am so sorry." But Keisha wasn't listening. She was looking at the pictures, at her face, at her children's faces, all of them out there for the world to see. Her quiet, private life was gone, shattered by a few clicks of a camera and a few lines of code. The humiliation was a terrible, physical ache in her chest. All of her struggles, all of her pain, all of her years of fighting to survive, were now just a headline. She was a curiosity, a woman who had been found, a story for the world to consume and judge. "We have to leave," she said, her voice shaking. "We have to go. Now." William looked at her, his face a mixture of concern and protectiveness. "Keisha, we can't. The city is a circus right now. There are reporters and cameras everywhere. It's not safe to go out. It's not safe to stay here either," she said, her voice rising with a panic she couldn't control. "We're a spectacle. We're a joke. We have to leave." He took her hands in his grip firm and reassuring. "I know this is hard," he said, his voice soft, "but you can't run from this. I won't let you run from this. I will protect you. I will protect them. I swear it." Just as he said the words, a loud, insistent knocking came from the door. William's face hardened. He knew who it was. The media. They had found them. Keisha's heart pounded even faster, a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She looked at him, her eyes wide with fear, and he just shook his head. "Don't worry," he said. "I've got this." He walked over to the door and opened it just a crack. A swarm of reporters, all of them holding microphones and cameras, were standing there. They started shouting questions at him, a chaotic mix of words and noise that was both terrifying and overwhelming. He held up a hand, a gesture that was both firm and commanding, and the noise level dropped a little. "We have no comment at this time," he said, his voice calm and firm. "We ask that you respect our privacy and the privacy of my family. We will be making a statement in the coming days. Until then, please leave us alone." The reporters didn't move. They just stared, their cameras flashing, their faces a mixture of curiosity and a relentless, predatory hunger. William looked at them for a long, quiet moment, his eyes a cold, hard green. He was a king, and he was staring down a pack of wolves. He knew this game. He had been playing it for years, and he knew how to win. He slowly closed the door, a loud, final click that shut out the chaos and left them in a fragile, temporary silence. He turned to Keisha, who was standing in the middle of the room, her body trembling. He walked over to her and wrapped her in his arms, holding her close. She was stiff at first, but then she relaxed, her body leaning into his. She closed her eyes, and she just stood there, in his arms, feeling his warmth and his strength. It was a powerful, comforting feeling, a feeling of being safe, a feeling she hadn't felt in a very long time. "It's going to be okay," he whispered, his voice a low, soothing sound. "I promise you, it's going to be okay. I'm not going to let them hurt you, or the children. I'm going to do everything in my power to make this right." She didn't say anything. She just stood there, in his arms, and she cried. Silent, hot tears that slipped down her face and onto his sweater. She cried for the past, for the pain, for the loneliness. She cried for her children, for the life she had fought so hard to give them. And she cried for the future, for the uncertainty, for the fear that was now a constant, unwelcome companion. The twins, who had woken up from the commotion, walked out of the bedroom, their little faces filled with a quiet concern. They saw their mother, crying in the arms of the strange man, and their little hearts were full of fear. They walked over to her, their small bodies a comforting presence, and they wrapped their arms around her legs. Keisha knelt down and hugged them, her body still shaking with sobs. She looked at them, at their beautiful, innocent faces, and a powerful, protective instinct rose up inside her. She was a mother. She was a protector. She had to be strong. William knelt down beside her, and he wrapped an arm around her and the children, pulling them all into a tight, warm hug. He was their rock, their protector, their silent, comforting presence. He looked at the twins, at their small, worried faces, and his heart ached for them. He had failed them. He had failed their mother. But he wouldn't fail them now. The headlines, however, were just the beginning. Gregory had a bigger plan. He had not just leaked the photos. He had also given a series of anonymous tips to the media. Tips about a company, about money, about a scandal that was about to come to light. He was going to use Keisha and the children as a tool, a way to hurt William where he was most vulnerable. He was going to destroy his company, his reputation, and his life. The headlines were just the first volley in a war that was about to begin. And the family, now exposed and vulnerable, had no idea what was coming. The storm outside the hotel suite was nothing compared to the one brewing inside William's world. The moment he stepped out of the elevator and into the sleek, quiet halls of his company's headquarters, he could feel the tension in the air. His office, a space of glass and polished wood that usually felt like a fortress of success, now felt like a battleground. He was late, something that never happened. But for the first time in years, he had a reason that was bigger than a meeting or a deal. His family. His personal assistant, a young woman named Sarah with a face full of worry, met him at the door. "Mr. Carter, the board is waiting. They've been calling since this morning. It's a disaster." William just nodded. "Let them wait another minute, Sarah. Get me a coffee. Black." He walked past her, his mind already a million miles away, and he just stood there for a moment, looking out at the city. The city that was now a battlefield, a place where his private life had become a public spectacle. He thought about Keisha, about the twins, about their beautiful, terrified faces from the morning. He had to be strong. For them. He walked into the boardroom, and the silence was deafening. The long, polished table was filled with men and women in expensive suits, all of them staring at him, their faces a mixture of judgment and concern. They were the people he had built his empire with, the people who had trusted him with their money and their careers. But now, their faces held a cold, hard look that said it all. The chairman of the board, a man named Mr. Thompson with a face that looked like it was carved from granite, cleared his throat. "William," he said, his voice a low, disapproving rumble. "We need to talk about this situation." He gestured to a tablet on the table, which was filled with the headlines and pictures from the morning. William didn't look at the tablet. He didn't have to. He had seen enough. "I know why you're here, Thompson. And I can assure you, my personal life has nothing to do with this company. It's a private matter, and I ask that you respect that." A woman with sharp eyes and an even sharper suit, a woman named Ms. Evans, leaned forward. With all due respect, William, your private life is no longer private. The media is having a field day. Our stock is taking a hit. This is a public relations nightmare. Then we will handle it, William said, his voice firm. We'll release a statement. We'll tell them the truth. The entire truth. The chairman's eyes widened. The truth? William, are you out of your mind? You can't just tell them that you abandoned a woman and the 2 children you didn't know you had. It's a career-ending move. They're not just a woman and 2 children, Thompson, William said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. They're my family, and they are not going anywhere. I refuse to let them be hurt by this. A man named Frank, a kind, older man who had been with William since the beginning, spoke up. William, we understand that this is a sensitive issue, but you have to think about the company. We have shareholders, employees, and a brand to protect. We need you to distance yourself from them, just for a little while, until this all blows over. William looked at him, his face a mixture of respect and disappointment. Frank, you of all people know that this company was built on trust, on integrity. How can I stand in front of my employees and my shareholders and tell them to trust me when I've just abandoned the most important people in my life? I'm not going to run. I'm not going to hide. I'm going to stand by my family, no matter the cost. The room was silent. Some of the executives looked away, their faces full of a quiet disapproval. But some, a few of them, looked at him with a glimmer of respect in their eyes. They had seen his passion, his dedication, and his moral backbone, and they knew he was a man of his word. The chairman sighed, a long, weary sound. William, we're not asking you to abandon them. We're just asking you to be smart about this. We can set them up with a home, a trust fund, a new life. A life away from the public eye. They'll be safe, they'll be happy, and you'll be able to continue your work without all this baggage. The word baggage hit William like a physical blow. He looked at the chairman, his face a cold, hard mask. They are not baggage. They are my family. They are my flesh and blood. And they are not for sale. Not for a company, not for a reputation, not for anything. You can either stand by me, or you can find a new CEO. The room was filled with a stunned silence. They had never seen William like this. He was always calm, always collected, always a master of his own destiny. But now he was different. He was a father, and a father's love was a powerful, all-consuming thing. The chairman looked at the other board members, a silent conversation passing between them. They were in a difficult position. They could either lose their most valuable asset, the man who had built their empire, or they could stand by him and face the public scrutiny. It was a no-win situation. Finally, the chairman spoke. William, we'll give you a week to clean this up, a week to make a public statement, a week to show the world that you are in control of your life and your business. We're giving you a chance. Don't make us regret it. William just nodded. He didn't say thank you. He didn't say a word. He just turned and walked out of the room, leaving the silence and the judgment behind. He had won the battle, but he knew the war was far from over. Back at the hotel, Keisha was sitting on the couch, watching the news, her body rigid with tension. The headlines were everywhere, screaming his name, her name, their children's names. She felt a powerful, overwhelming shame, a feeling that was so much more painful than the cold or the hunger. The world was judging her, judging them, and she didn't know if she could handle it. She was used to being invisible, but now she was a spectacle. William walked into the room, his face a little pale, but his eyes were filled with a powerful, determined light. He walked over to her and sat down beside her, taking her hands in his. It's going to be okay, he said, his voice a low, reassuring sound. I just came from a meeting with the board. They're on my side. They're going to stand by me. We're going to get through this. Together. Keisha looked at him, her eyes filled with a powerful, unspoken question. She believed him. She believed that he would protect them, that he would do everything in his power to make things right. But she also knew that the world was a cruel, unforgiving place. And she didn't know if their love, a new, fragile thing that was just beginning to bloom, could withstand the public scrutiny. She didn't know if they could survive the storm that was just beginning. The week that followed was a strange, beautiful mix of chaos and quiet moments. The hotel suite became their little world, a safe bubble where the noise and judgment of the outside world couldn't reach them. William, instead of being at his office, spent most of his time with his children. He had his team working remotely, his lawyer Mark handling the constant stream of calls and interviews. For the first time in his adult life, business wasn't his top priority. Family was. He was a natural father, a loving, patient man who had a hidden talent for making things fun. He taught Joshua how to build a spaceship out of empty cardboard boxes and a few rolls of tape. He explained how the different parts worked, using simple words and a lot of hand gestures. He didn't use any fancy, complicated talk about physics or engineering. He just made it sound like magic. Joshua's eyes were wide with a kind of awe he'd only ever felt when he was watching a superhero movie. They spent hours on the floor, surrounded by cardboard and tape, their hands a little sticky, their faces smudged with dirt, and their hearts full of joy. With Jada, it was a little different. She was a little more reserved, a little more cautious. But she was a dreamer, a little artist with a crayon and a napkin. William, with a quiet encouragement, bought her a big box of crayons and a huge sketchbook. They would sit together on the floor, and he would draw pictures with her. He wasn't very good at it, but he tried, and that was all that mattered. He drew silly pictures of his dogs, and a horse from his childhood farm. He would tell her stories about his life, about growing up in a place where the stars seemed so close you could almost touch them. Jada, her little face serious with concentration, would draw pictures of flowers and animals, and she would tell him stories of her own. Stories about a brave little girl who lived in a big, scary city, but had a beautiful, kind heart. Keisha would sit on the couch and watch them, her heart a fragile, beautiful thing in her chest. She saw William's patience, his kindness, and his unwavering dedication. He wasn't just a visitor. He wasn't just a man who had left. He was a father, a real father. The wall she had built around her heart, the wall of resentment and pain, was slowly, painfully coming down. She found herself smiling more, laughing more. She was starting to feel like herself again, a person who had a little bit of light inside her, a little bit of hope. One afternoon, as they were all sitting on the floor, William was showing Joshua how to draw a star in the sky. He was showing him how to make it look bright and shiny. Joshua looked at his drawing, and then he looked up at William, his eyes filled with a powerful, overwhelming love. "Dad?" he said, the word a small, quiet sound, a question and a statement all at once. William froze. He looked at Joshua, his eyes wide with a mix of surprise and pure, unadulterated joy. He had been a billionaire. He had been a CEO. He had been a lot of things. But he had never been a dad. The word was a precious, sacred thing on the little boy's lips. It was a word that meant more to him than all the money in the world. He reached out and gently hugged Joshua. A long, tight hug that was full of a love that had been hidden for too long. Jada, not wanting to be left out, came and hugged him too. "My dad," she said, her voice a little more sure than her brother's. William looked at her small, sweet face, and he just held them. He just held his children, his family, the most important people in his life. Tears, hot and silent, slipped from his eyes and rolled down his cheeks. He wasn't the powerful, important man anymore. He was just a father, a man who had found his way home. Keisha, watching from the couch, felt her own tears fall. She had been so scared, so angry, for so long. But now she wasn't. She was just happy. Happy that her children were happy. Happy that they had a father who loved them. Happy that they had found a place of safety and love. But as the days went on, as the bonds grew stronger, a new kind of fear began to creep in. It was a fear that was different from the fear of the outside world. It was a fear that came from within. The children were happy. They were getting attached. They were starting to love him. What if he left again? What if this was all a temporary thing? What if he went back to his old life, to his old world, and they were left alone again? One night, after William had read them a bedtime story and tucked them into bed, Joshua, His little voice, a quiet whisper, said, "Mommy." Keisha walked over to the bed and sat down beside him. "Yes, baby? Will he really stay?" he asked, his eyes filled with a powerful, unspoken question. "Will Dad really stay?" The question hung in the air, a small, fragile thing that was so much bigger than a few words. Keisha looked at her son, at his small, worried face, and her heart ached for him. She wanted to tell him yes. She wanted to tell him that his father would never leave them. But she couldn't. She didn't know the answer. She didn't know what the future held. She just knew that for now, in this moment, they were safe. But would it last? Only time would tell. The quiet of the hotel suite was a peaceful, if fragile, thing. The children were sleeping soundly, their small, contented snores a beautiful lullaby. Keisha was cleaning up the living room, gathering the scattered toys and books, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts. Joshua's question from the night before, "Will he really stay?" echoed in her head. She didn't know the answer. She didn't know if this beautiful, fragile peace would last. Her heart ached with the uncertainty of it all. She walked over to the desk in the corner of the room, a beautiful, polished wooden desk that was a world away from the park benches and bus stops she was used to. She was looking for a pen to make a list of things they would need when she noticed a small, leather-bound notebook tucked away in a drawer. It wasn't hers, and she knew it wasn't William's. It looked old, worn out, and out of place in the shiny, new room. Curiosity, a powerful, tempting thing, won her over. She pulled it out, her heart a little fluttery, and she opened it. The notebook was filled with beautiful, flowing handwriting. It was William's, but it wasn't just a notebook. It was a collection of letters. Unsent letters. The first one was dated a few months after he had left. A few months after he had left her alone. In the dark, with no word, no explanation. Her hands trembled as she read the words of a young man. A boy who was full of a powerful, itching love and a desperate, heartbreaking regret. "My dearest Keisha," the first letter began. "I am writing to you from a place that feels a million miles away from you. I miss you. I miss your laugh, your smile, the way you look at me with those beautiful eyes. I am so sorry I had to leave, but I had to. Gregory told me this was a once-in-a-lifetime chance, a chance to build a better life for us. He promised me he would tell you everything, that he would tell you I loved you and that I would be back for you. Please, Keisha, don't hate me. I am coming back for you. I promise." Keisha's heart pounded in her chest, a loud, frantic drum against her ribs. She kept reading, her eyes wide with a mix of shock and a powerful, overwhelming sorrow. The letters were filled with a raw, honest emotion that was so different from the cold, professional man she had seen in the news. He wrote about his loneliness, his fear, his desperation to make it big so he could come back for her. He wrote about his guilt, his pain, his regret. He had never stopped loving her. He had never stopped trying to find her. The letters were a testament to his love, a love that had been hidden, a love that had been buried under years of pain and betrayal. She found a letter that was dated a few years later. The handwriting was a little more confident, a little more mature, but the love was still there. He wrote about his success, about his company, about the money and the power, but he also wrote about the emptiness. "I have everything I ever wanted," he wrote, "but I have nothing. I am a lonely man in a lonely world. I have all the money in the world, but I have no one to share it with. I tried to find you, Keisha. I hired a private investigator, but he couldn't find you. I thought you had just moved on. I thought you had found someone else. I thought you had forgotten about me." Tears, hot and silent, slipped down her face and onto the pages. It was all a lie, all of it. Gregory, that manipulative, jealous snake, had been the one pulling the strings. He had been the one who had lied to her. He had been the one who had told her that William had left her for another woman. He had been the one who had destroyed their relationship. The truth, a painful, beautiful thing, was now staring her in the face. She had been so wrong. She had been so angry at the wrong person. The pain of the past, the years of struggle and loneliness, was all because of a lie. She walked out of the room, the notebook clutched in her hands, her heart a raw, bleeding thing in her chest. She found William in the living room, sitting on the couch, a cup of coffee in his hands, his face tired and worried. He looked up at her, his face a silent question. She didn't say a word. She just walked over to him and held out the notebook, her hands trembling. He took it from her, his eyes full of a quiet confusion. He opened it and his eyes widened. He looked at the first page, at his own words, words he hadn't seen in years. A wave of emotion, a powerful, overwhelming thing, washed over him. He had thought those letters were gone, that they had been lost to time. He didn't know how she had found them, but he was glad she had. "I found them in the desk drawer," she said, her voice a little shaky. "I read them all." He just sat there, looking at her, his heart in his eyes. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. She had read his heart. She had seen his pain, his regret, his love. It was all there in his own handwriting. She sat down beside him, her body rigid with a mix of anger, sorrow, and a tiny, fragile spark of hope. "Gregory," she said, her voice a low, dangerous growl. "He lied to me. He told me you had met someone else. He told me you had left me. He told me you had used me." William's jaw tightened. "I knew it," he said, his voice a cold, hard sound. "I knew he was a liar. I knew he was jealous of us. I just never thought he would go this far." He looked at her, his eyes full of a terrible, heartbreaking pain. "Keisha, I am so sorry. I am so sorry that you had to go through all of this. All these years of pain, of struggle, of loneliness. It was all because of a lie." She didn't say anything. She just sat there, looking at him, her heart in her eyes. The anger, the fury, the resentment she had felt for him for so long was gone, replaced by a deep, powerful sorrow. She had been so wrong. He hadn't abandoned her. He had been a victim just like her. He had been lied to. He had been manipulated. And he had lost just as much as she had. The silence between them was not an uncomfortable one. It was a silence filled with a deep, powerful sorrow. It was a silence that was healing, that was mending, that was beginning to fill the void that had been in their hearts for so long. She looked at him, at his tired, worried face, and she saw the man she had loved so many years ago, the kind, gentle, and loving man who had won her heart. He was still there. He had always been there. Her mind was a whirlwind of emotions. She was angry at Gregory, at the years he had stolen from them. She was sad for William, for the loneliness he had endured. And she was full of a tiny, fragile spark of hope. Hope for the future. Hope for a life they could have together. A life of love, of happiness, of family. She knew she had a choice to make. A choice to hold onto the pain of the past, or a choice to let it go. She could let the wounds, the deep, terrible wounds of betrayal and loneliness, dominate her heart. Or she could let her love, a new, fragile thing that was just beginning to bloom, grow and heal her heart. She looked at him, at his tired, worried face, and she knew what she had to do. The question was not if she would forgive him. The question was when. The quiet of the hotel suite was a peaceful, if fragile, thing. Keisha and William sat on the couch, the worn leather notebook of his unsent letters resting between them. The anger, the pain, the betrayal, it all felt a million miles away. What was left was a deep, quiet sadness for the years they had lost and a powerful, fragile hope for the years to come. William had held her as she cried, her body shaking with a sorrow that was so much bigger than a few words. He had just held her, a silent, comforting presence, and he had let her cry. When her tears were finally gone, and her body was still, she looked at him, her eyes red and puffy, and she just said, "I'm so sorry, William. I'm so sorry." He had just shook his head. "Don't be," he had said, his voice a low, reassuring rumble. "We were both victims. We were both lied to. We were both hurt. There's nothing to be sorry for. Not anymore." But there was one thing they both knew they had to do. They had to know for sure. The letters were one thing, a powerful, emotional proof of his love and his intentions. But they were just words. The children were living, breathing proof. But they needed more. They needed to be certain. And so, the next morning, they took the twins to a private doctor, a man who had worked with William for years, a man who was quiet and discreet and who knew how to keep a secret. The doctor, a kind, older man with a gentle face and a reassuring voice, took a small sample from each of them. It was a simple, painless procedure, a simple swab from the inside of their cheeks. But it felt like a monumental thing, a moment that would change their lives forever. They had to wait for the results. A few days that felt like a lifetime. Back at the hotel, the silence was a different kind of silence. It was a nervous, expectant one. A silence filled with unspoken questions and a quiet, powerful hope. They didn't talk about the test. They didn't talk about the past. They just lived in the moment, in their beautiful temporary bubble. William spent all his time with the children, reading them stories, playing with them, making them laugh. He was a father, and he was a good one. He was a man who had been given a second chance, and he was not going to waste it. Keisha watched him, her heart in her eyes. The old wounds were still there, but they were healing. The anger, the resentment, the pain. It was all slowly, painfully disappearing. What was left was a powerful, all-consuming love for this man. A love she had never truly lost. The call came a few days later, just as they were all sitting on the floor, building a huge, magnificent castle out of building blocks. William's phone rang, and the sound was a jarring, unwelcome thing in the quiet room. He looked at the screen, and his face, which had been so relaxed, so happy, tightened. It was the doctor. He excused himself and went into the other room. Keisha, her heart pounding in her chest, just sat there, watching the door. The children, sensing her tension, stopped playing and just looked at her, their little faces full of a quiet question. She didn't say a word. She just waited, her heart a loud, frantic drum against her ribs. The minutes stretched on, feeling like an eternity. And then the door opened. William walked out, his face unreadable. He walked over to her, his movements slow and deliberate, and he just stood there for a moment, looking at her. Keisha's heart was in her throat. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't speak. She just waited for his words. He knelt down in front of her, his eyes, those beautiful green eyes, filled with tears. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. The truth was there in his eyes. He wrapped his arms around her. A long, tight hug that was full of a love that was so big, so powerful, that it felt like it could swallow them both whole. "They're ours," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "They're our children. The DNA test, it's a perfect match." Keisha's body went limp with relief. Tears, hot and silent, streamed down her face. She just held him, her body shaking with a powerful, overwhelming joy. The twins, sensing the powerful emotion in the room, ran over to them. They wrapped their arms around their parents, their small bodies a comforting presence. They didn't understand what was happening, but they knew it was a good thing. They knew that their family was finally truly whole. The four of them just sat there, on the floor, in a tight, beautiful huddle, their bodies a testament to a love that had been lost and found. There were no words. No words were needed. It was just them together, a family. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated joy. But as the joy filled the room, a new, cold reality began to set in. Gregory. He was still out there, a lurking, invisible threat. He had set a plan in motion, a plan to destroy William's life, his career, his reputation. He had used them as a tool, a weapon, a way to hurt William where he was most vulnerable. And now he had the perfect weapon. The DNA test. The proof. Back in his sleek, modern apartment, Gregory sat at his desk, a glass of whiskey in his hand. He was watching the news, a small, triumphant smile on his lips. The headlines were everywhere, screaming about William Carter and his secret family. He had done his work. He had set the fire. And now he was just waiting for it all to burn down. He knew the media would demand answers. They would demand a public statement. And when William gave it, when he confirmed the children were his, the real chaos would begin. The shareholders, the board, the public, they would all turn on him. He had been a hero, a genius, a king. But a man who had abandoned his family? A man who had hidden the truth for years? He was nothing. He was a fraud. He picked up his phone, his hands trembling with a sick excitement. He had one more call to make. One more piece of information to leak. A small, subtle detail that would be the final nail in William's coffin. A detail about a secret investigation, about a company that was not what it seemed. The game was far from over, and Gregory, the puppet master, was ready to watch the final act unfold. The news of the DNA test spread like wildfire, a final, powerful proof that sealed the truth. The media went wild, their headlines now changing from "Billionaire's secret family" to "A father's love revealed." William held a private press conference with Keisha by his side, where he spoke honestly, his voice filled with a powerful, emotional sincerity. He told them about the love he had for Keisha, about the lies that had torn them apart, and about the pure, unconditional joy he felt at finding his children. He didn't offer a single apology for his past. He only offered an unwavering commitment to his future. He wasn't hiding anymore. He wasn't running. He was standing in front of the world, and he was being a father, a partner, a man of his word. The public, who had been so quick to judge, was now moved by his honesty. People love a good comeback story, a story of hope and redemption. And this was a story of a man who had lost his way and found it again. A man who had been given a second chance, and he was taking it. They were no longer a spectacle, a public joke. They were a family. In the days that followed, the hotel suite became a true home. The children were happy. Their small faces lit up with a joy that had been missing for so long. They loved their new life, their new father. They loved the new toys, the warm, comfortable bed, the delicious food. But more than anything, they loved the time they spent with him. He was their hero, their protector, their friend. William was a man who had always been busy, always on the go, always running from one meeting to the next. But now he was a different man. He was a man who knew what was important. He had his team running things, his trusted lawyer, Mark, handling all the business. He was at home with his family. He was teaching Joshua how to throw a football, his strong, calloused hands guiding the little boy's small, uncoordinated ones. He was reading stories to Jada, her little head nestled on his shoulder, her quiet, peaceful breathing a soothing sound in the room. He was a father, and he was a good one. He was a man who had found his purpose. And in the quiet moments, when the children were sleeping, the old flame between him and Keisha began to flicker to life. They would sit on the couch, the city lights glittering outside the window, and they would just talk. They would talk about the past, about the years of pain and loneliness, and they would talk about the future, about the hopes and dreams they had for their children, for their family. The awkwardness was gone, replaced by a deep, quiet comfort. They were no longer strangers. They were two people who had been through so much, who had been hurt so deeply, who had found their way back to each other. One night, as they were sitting on the couch, watching a movie, Keisha leaned her head against his shoulder. His arm came up, and he wrapped it around her, his hand resting on her arm, his fingers gently stroking her skin. It was a simple, quiet gesture, but it was so full of a powerful, emotional meaning. It was a gesture that said, "I am here. I am not going anywhere." She closed her eyes, and she just sat there, in his arms, feeling his warmth and his strength. It was a feeling of being safe, of being home, a feeling she had not felt in a very long time. Another evening, William was preparing a special meal in the hotel's kitchenette. Keisha walked in, and she just stood there, watching him, a small, genuine smile on her face. He was in his element, a man who could command a boardroom but could also cook a simple, beautiful meal for his family. He looked up and caught her watching him. His smile was a beautiful, heartwarming thing. "What?" he asked, his voice low and teasing. "Am I that bad of a cook?" She just shook her head, her smile growing wider. "No," she said, her voice a little choked up. You're a good man, William." He just looked at her, his eyes filled with a powerful, unspoken emotion. He put the spoon down and walked over to her. He reached out and gently touched her cheek, his hand rough but his touch so soft. "And you're a good woman, Keisha. You're the strongest woman I've ever met." He leaned in, his lips just a breath away from hers, and he just held her there. It wasn't a kiss. It was a promise of a future they could have together, a future of love, of happiness, of a family that was finally whole. He took her and the children to the park, a huge, beautiful park with big, green trees and a beautiful little playground. It was a simple outing, a day of fun and laughter. The children ran, their small, happy bodies a blur of motion. William pushed them on the swings, their laughter echoing through the air, a beautiful musical sound. Keisha sat on a bench, watching them, her heart full of a powerful, overwhelming love. She had her children, and she had the man she had loved for so long. She had everything she had ever wanted. She was home. But as the day went on, as the laughter and the joy filled the air, a small, cold shadow loomed in the background. A man, a nondescript man with a camera, was sitting on a bench across from them, his face hidden behind a newspaper. He was watching them. He was watching their every move, their every smile, their every laugh. He was a spy. He was working for Gregory, a man who was still out there, a man who had not given up on his plan to destroy them. The day was beautiful. The sun was shining, and their hearts were full of hope. But the shadow was there, a quiet, sinister thing, a reminder that the danger was far from over. The beautiful, fragile peace of the last few days was shattered by a new kind of storm. The media, which had been so kind and forgiving, suddenly turned on them again. The headlines were no longer about a father's love or a second chance. They were about scandal, about lawsuits, and about a secret investigation. The peace was gone, replaced by a deep, familiar dread that settled in Keisha's heart. William had spent the morning on the phone, his face a hard, cold mask. He was talking to his lawyers, to his board, to his public relations team. His voice, which had been so soft and gentle with the children, was now sharp and commanding. He was a king, and he was staring down a pack of wolves. And he knew, with a terrible, cold certainty, that the leader of the pack was Gregory. Gregory, a man who had always been a shadow, was now a public enemy. He had leaked a series of documents to the media, documents that suggested that William's company was involved in a shady deal, a deal that was not what it seemed. The documents were a work of fiction, a lie, but they were a powerful lie. The media, hungry for a scandal, had gobbled it up, and now the world was judging William again. Not as a man who had been given a second chance, but as a man who was a fraud, a liar, a man who had built his empire on a foundation of lies. Keisha watched him, her heart in her eyes. He was a man under siege. He was a man who was fighting for his life, for his reputation, for his family. And he was doing it all for them. She wanted to help, to do something, anything, but she didn't know what to do. She was just a woman from Jamaica, a woman who had spent the last 8 years fighting to survive. She knew nothing of the corporate world, of the world of money and power. She was a fish out of water, a beautiful, vulnerable fish in a shark tank. The children, however, were oblivious to the storm. They were just happy. They were with their parents, and they were in a beautiful, warm place. They were playing with their new toys, their small, happy voices a soothing sound in the chaos. They were a reminder of what was at stake, of what William was fighting for. One afternoon, as the children were watching a movie, Keisha walked over to William, who was sitting at the desk, his head in his hands. He looked up at her, his face pale and exhausted. The lines around his eyes were deeper, and his eyes, those beautiful green eyes, were filled with a powerful, terrible worry. "What is it, William?" she asked, her voice low and concerned. "What's going on?" He just sighed, a long, weary sound. "Gregory," he said, the name a bitter taste in his mouth. "He's trying to destroy me. He's trying to destroy the company. He's using the media, using my reputation, using the children. He's trying to make me look like a fraud. He's trying to make me lose everything." Keisha's heart sank. She had known he was a threat, a silent, invisible threat. But she had never imagined he would go this far. He was a monster, a man who would do anything to get what he wanted. "We have to do something," she said, her voice shaking with a mix of fear and a powerful, protective fury. We can't just let him win. William just shook his head. We can't fight him, Keisha. Not with money. Not with lawyers. He's a ghost. He works in the shadows. He's a coward. He's not just attacking me. He's attacking all of us. He's threatening our family, our peace, our future. I won't let him win. Just as he said the words, a loud, insistent knock came from the door. Keisha's heart pounded in her chest, a frantic drum against her ribs. She looked at William, her eyes wide with a terrible fear. He just shook his head, a silent, reassuring gesture. It's okay, he said, his voice low and calm. It's just the hotel staff. We've had a lot of deliveries today. He walked over to the door and opened it, but there was no one there. He looked down, and a small white envelope was on the floor. He picked it up, his face a mask of confusion, and he opened it. Inside, there was a single piece of paper. His face, which had been so calm just a moment ago, turned to stone. His eyes, those beautiful green eyes, were filled with a cold, powerful fury. What is it? Keisha asked, her voice barely a whisper. He didn't say anything. He just handed her the note. She took it from him, her hands trembling, and she read the words. The words were simple, but they were a knife to her heart. You can't hide forever. Below the words, there was a small picture, a picture of the hotel lobby, and in the corner of the picture, there was a small, blurry picture of the twins. They were holding hands, their small, happy faces looking up at a big, beautiful chandelier. The picture was a violation, an act of pure evil. It was a threat to her children, to her family. Keisha's body went rigid with a powerful, protective fury. She wasn't scared anymore. She was just angry, a cold, powerful anger that was a new and terrifying thing. She was no longer a victim. She was a mother who would do anything to protect her children. She looked at William, and her eyes were filled with a cold, determined light. She had been on a journey of healing, a journey of forgiveness. But now it was time for a journey of vengeance. The man who had taken her life from her, the man who had hurt her and her family, was not going to win. Not this time. She looked at him, and her eyes, which had been so full of tears and a quiet fear, were now filled with a powerful, unwavering resolve. We're going to fight him, William, she said, her voice a low, hard sound. We're going to fight him, and we're going to win. The fight, which had been his alone, was now a family fight. And they were going to fight it together. The day started like any other, filled with the soft, gentle sounds of a family finally finding its footing. The morning was bright and crisp, and the hotel suite was a haven of peace. William had an important conference call, so he was in the other room, his voice a low, steady rumble as he talked to his team. Keisha was in the living room with the twins, Jada drawing on her new sketchbook and Joshua building a magnificent castle with his new blocks. She was watching them, a small, genuine smile on her face. Her heart, which had been so guarded for so long, felt light and free. The past was behind them, and the future, a bright and beautiful thing, was just beginning. But happiness, as Keisha had learned, was a fragile, fleeting thing. A knock came at the door, a soft, polite knock that didn't feel out of place in a fancy hotel. She looked at the children, her smile still in place. Who could that be? She asked, her voice a light, playful sound. Joshua, his little face serious with concentration, didn't look up from his blocks. Jada, however, looked up and smiled. Maybe it's a surprise, she said, her voice filled with a childish excitement. Keisha walked over to the door and opened it, but there was no one there. She frowned, a small, puzzled look on her face. She looked down, and a small, beautifully wrapped box was on the floor. It was a gift box, a bright, cheerful red, with a big, gold ribbon tied on top. It looked like a present. A tiny seed of doubt, of suspicion, began to grow in her heart. She looked at the box, and then she looked back at the hallway. It was empty. The sound of the children's laughter, which had been so loud and clear just a moment ago, suddenly felt very far away. She turned around, the box in her hands, and she looked at the children. Joshua was no longer building his castle. Jada was no longer drawing. They were gone. The room was empty. The toys were still there, the blocks scattered on the floor, the sketchbook open on the table. But the children, her beautiful, precious children, were gone. A cold, powerful dread washed over her. Her heart, which had been so light and free, now felt like a block of ice in her chest. The world, which had been so bright and beautiful just a moment ago, was now a dark, terrifying place. She dropped the box, the sound a loud, jarring thing in the silent room, and she ran. She ran to the bedroom, to the bathroom, to every corner of the suite. But they were gone. Her beautiful, precious children were gone. "William!" she screamed, her voice a raw, animalistic sound. "William, they're gone." William, hearing the fear in her voice, came running out of the other room, his face a mask of concern. "Keisha? What is it? What's wrong?" He looked at her pale, terrified face, and then he looked at the empty room. His heart, a strong, steady drum, suddenly stopped. His eyes, those beautiful green eyes, were wide with a terrible, horrifying realization. His children were gone. He ran to the balcony, looking out at the city below, a frantic search in his eyes. He looked under the beds, in the closets, in every corner of the suite. But they were gone. The room, which had been so full of life and laughter just a moment ago, was now a silent, empty tomb. Keisha was on the floor, her body shaking with a deep, visceral terror. She was crying, a raw, gut-wrenching sound that was so full of pain and fear that it would have broken a statue's heart. William knelt down and pulled her into his arms, his body trembling with a powerful, overwhelming panic. He was a billionaire. He was a man with power, with influence, with a world that was at his feet. But in this moment, he was nothing. He was just a father, a terrified, broken man who had lost his children. "I'm so sorry, Keisha," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I should have known. I should have known he would go this far." Just as he said the words, his phone buzzed with a new message. He pulled it out, his hands shaking, and he looked at the screen. It was an email. A cold, menacing, anonymous email. The sender's name was Gregory's Shadow. The subject line was chilling. "A king without his heirs." He opened it, his heart pounding in his chest, a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The message was short and to the point. "You have what I want, and I have what you want. A little trade. You'll get your children back, and I'll get everything you've ever worked for. You have a few hours to decide. One wrong move, one phone call, and their lives are on the line. You can try to find me, but you won't. You can try to fight me, but you'll lose. I've been planning this for years, William. I'm a ghost. You can't catch me. You can only give me what I want. And you know what that is." Attached to the email was a series of pictures. Pictures of the twins, their small faces pale and terrified. They were in a dark, unfamiliar room, a room with concrete walls and a single small window. They were tied to a chair, their little bodies small and vulnerable. The sight of them, so scared and so alone, was a knife to William's heart. He looked at the pictures, and his heart was filled with a cold, terrifying fury. Gregory had gone too far. He had crossed a line he could never uncross. He looked at Keisha, who was still on the floor, her body trembling with a quiet, terrible terror. He was a man who had built an empire, a man who had faced down giants. But in this moment he was a father who was staring into the eyes of a monster. He knew what he had to do. He would give him everything. He would give him his company, his money, his life. He would give him everything he had ever worked for. He would give him everything and more. He would give him everything but his family. He stood up, his body straight and his face a cold, determined mask. "Keisha," he said, his voice low and firm, "we're going to get them back. I swear it." The kidnapper's instructions were clear. He was to follow every command, every word, or the children would be gone forever. William was ready to do whatever it took. He was ready to give up his empire, to lose everything. He was a king without a kingdom, but a father with a family. And he was going to fight for it. William's phone was the only light in the pitch-black suite. He was sitting on the floor, the ransom instructions on the screen, a chilling set of demands that were so complicated, so full of twists and turns, that they felt like a game. A sick, twisted game designed to push him to his limits. He wasn't going to play it. He wasn't going to let Gregory win. He was a father, and a father's love was a powerful, all-consuming thing. It was a love that was a weapon. He had spent the night in a frantic, desperate search. He had called his security team, his lawyers, his most trusted people. He had told them everything. He had told them about Gregory, about the lies, about the company, about the children. They had listened, their faces a mixture of shock and a quiet, powerful determination. They were a team, a group of people who had stood by him through thick and thin. And now they were going to stand by him again. They were going to fight for his family. Keisha was in the bedroom, a blanket pulled over her head, her body shaking with a quiet, terrible terror. He wanted to go to her, to hold her, to tell her that it was all going to be okay. But he couldn't. He had a mission. He had to be a soldier, a warrior, a man who would do anything to get his children back. The first step was to find them. The ransom note had a series of codes, a series of clues that were designed to mislead him. But William was a genius. He was a man who had built an empire on a foundation of ideas. He had spent his life solving problems, and this was the biggest problem he had ever faced. He took a deep breath, his mind a whirlwind of numbers and words, and he began to decode the clues. The clues were a series of street names, of numbers, of letters that didn't make sense. But to William they were a puzzle, a map. He worked all night, his mind a quiet, brilliant thing, and by morning he had it. The location. It was a warehouse. An old, abandoned warehouse on the other side of town. It was a place that was so remote, so desolate, that it felt like it was in another world. He didn't tell Keisha where he was going. He didn't want to worry her. He just kissed her on the forehead as she slept, a silent, powerful promise, and he left. He drove his car, a sleek, black, powerful thing, a thing that was a world away from the fancy cars and private jets he was used to. He was a man on a mission, a man who was ready to fight. He arrived at the warehouse, a huge, abandoned place with broken windows and a door that was ajar. He parked his car a few blocks away, and he walked. He walked in the quiet of the morning, his body a silent, tense thing. He pulled out his phone, and he called his security team. "I'm here," he said, his voice a low, commanding sound. "Stay back. Don't engage. Just be ready." He wasn't going to let them in danger. He was going to do this himself. He walked into the warehouse, and the air was cold and filled with the smell of dust and old metal. The building was huge, a silent, empty tomb. He walked slowly, his body a silent, tense thing, his eyes a cold, hard green. He was looking for them. He was looking for his children. He was looking for the man who had taken them from him. He heard a sound, a small, muffled sound. It was the sound of a child crying. His heart, which had been so cold and hard, suddenly melted. He followed the sound, his body a silent, powerful thing, and he found them. They were in a small, dark room, their small bodies tied to a chair. Their faces were pale and tear-stained, and their eyes were wide with a quiet, terrible fear. And then he heard a sound from the shadows. A man's voice, a voice he knew. Well, William, you found them. I knew you would. You're a smart man, but you're a fool. You're a fool for trusting me, and you're a fool for thinking you could win." It was Gregory. He stepped out of the shadows, a small, triumphant smile on his face. He was dressed in black, a man who was always in the shadows, a man who was a ghost. He wasn't a fighter. He was a puppet master, and he had a gun in his hand. "They're a beautiful family, William," Gregory said, his voice a cold, menacing sound. "A beautiful, perfect family. I could never have that. I could never have a family. I was always second. I was always in your shadow. But not anymore. Not now. I'm going to take everything from you. Your company, your money, your reputation. And I'm going to watch you suffer." William just looked at him, his face a cold, determined mask. "You're a sick man, Gregory," he said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "You're a sick, pathetic man. You can take my money. You can take my company. You can take everything. But you can't take them. They're my family. They're my life. And I will die before I let you hurt them. He looked at his children, at their small, terrified faces, and a powerful, all-consuming love filled his heart. He wasn't scared anymore. He was just a father. And a father's love was a powerful, all-consuming thing. He took a step forward, his body a silent, powerful thing, and he fought. He fought not with his money, not with his power, not with his team. He fought with his hands, with his heart, with his love. He was a man who was fighting for his family. And a man who fights for his family is a man who cannot lose. The fight was quick and brutal. William, a man who had not fought in years, was a force of nature. He was a man who had a reason to fight. He was a man who was fighting for his children. He fought with a powerful, raw fury, a fury that was born out of love and fear. He hit Gregory, and he hit him again, and he hit him again. He was a man who was filled with a terrible, powerful rage. Gregory, a man who had always been a coward, was no match for him. He was a man who was used to working in the shadows. He was a man who was used to pulling the strings. But he was not a man who was used to a fight. William hit him, and he hit him again, and he hit him again. And then he just stood there, his body shaking, his hands a little bloody, and he just looked at him. Gregory, his face a bloody, bruised mess, was on the floor, his body shaking with a deep, visceral terror. He looked at William, and his eyes, those sharp, clever eyes, were filled with a powerful, overwhelming fear. He had made a mistake. He had underestimated him. He had thought he was a man who had a lot to lose. But he was a man who had a lot to fight for. William walked over to his children and he untied them. He hugged them. A long, tight hug that was full of a powerful, overwhelming love. Joshua and Jada, their small bodies trembling with fear, just held him. Their little bodies a silent, comforting presence. He had saved them. He had saved his family. He looked back at Gregory, who was now a pathetic, defeated thing on the floor. He wanted to kill him. He wanted to end him. But he couldn't. He had a family to protect. He had a future to fight for. He pulled out his phone and he called the police. "I have a situation," he said, his voice a low, firm sound. "I have the man who kidnapped my children. And I have them. They're safe. Just get him. I'll be here waiting." But as he made the call, as he looked at his children, Gregory, a man who was always a ghost, was gone. He had a secret exit, a small, dark door that led to the shadows. He was a man who was not a fighter. He was a man who was a survivor. He was a man who was always in the shadows. And as he ran, as he disappeared into the darkness, he just laughed. A cold, menacing, chilling laugh that was a promise. "I'll be back, William," he whispered, his voice a low, raspy sound. "I'll be back, and I'm going to make you pay for what should have been mine. You can't hide forever. The game is just beginning." The frantic energy that had filled William's world for the past few days was replaced by a tense, eerie quiet. He was at the police station, giving his statement, a detective sitting across from him, his face a careful mask of concentration. Keisha was with the twins in a different room, a kind police officer watching over them, making sure they were safe. William was a man who had faced down giants, but in this moment he felt small, vulnerable, and exhausted. He had told them everything, about Gregory, about the lies, about the company, about the kidnapping. And he had given them the proof, the DNA test, the unsent letters, the note. He had given them everything he had. And now all he could do was wait. The police, however, didn't wait. They moved with a swift, powerful efficiency. They had been watching Gregory for a while, a man who was always in the shadows, a man who was always a step ahead of them. But now they had him. They had the evidence. The cameras in the hotel hallway, the phone records, the computer files, it was all there. A cold, hard, undeniable trail of evidence that led right back to him. The news broke like a bomb. The media, which had been so quick to judge, was now so quick to apologize. The headlines, which had been so full of hate, were now so full of shock and disbelief. Gregory Miles, a corporate monster, exposed. One headline screamed, "Billionaire's business partner, a master of manipulation, arrested for kidnapping. Another one said. The world, which had been so quick to judge, was now seeing the truth. William was a hero. He was a man who had been wronged, a man who had been a victim of a sick, twisted man's jealousy. He was a father who had fought for his family, and he had won. He was a man who had been given a second chance, and he was taking it. Back at the hotel, Keisha watched the news, her body rigid with a mix of relief and a lingering, powerful fear. She saw Gregory's face on the screen, his face a cold, hard mask, his eyes filled with a powerful, burning hatred. He was a monster, a man who had destroyed her life, a man who had hurt her children. He was a man who was finally, truly, getting what he deserved. The police came to the hotel later that night, a kind, older detective with a gentle face. He told them everything. He told them about the evidence, about the confession, about Gregory's plan to destroy William's company, to take everything from him. He told them that Gregory was in jail, and that he would be there for a very, very long time. Keisha just sat there, her heart in her eyes. It was over. The nightmare was over. The man who had haunted her life for so long was finally, truly, gone. The fear, the pain, the anger, it all just washed away. She was free. Her children were free. Her family was free. William came and sat beside her, his body tired, but his eyes were filled with a quiet, peaceful light. He took her hand in his and he just held it. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. The silence was a beautiful, peaceful thing. It was a silence that was filled with a powerful, emotional meaning. It was a silence that said, "We are safe. We are free. We are finally, truly home." But as the joy and the relief filled the room, a small, dark shadow loomed in the background. Gregory, in the darkness of his jail cell, his face a cold, hard mask, stared at a small, framed picture of William, his eyes filled with a quiet, terrifying fury. He had lost. He had failed. But he wasn't done. Not yet. He had a plan. Plan for revenge. A plan that would be his final and most powerful act. He was a man who had lost everything, and he was a man who had nothing left to lose. He was a man who was finally, truly free. And he was a man who was ready to fight. And he was going to win. He was going to get his revenge, no matter the cost. The weeks that followed were a blur of courtrooms, lawyers, and a powerful, relentless media storm. The trial was a public spectacle, a brutal and honest look into a man's twisted mind. Gregory, who had been so cunning and so clever in the shadows, was now a pathetic, broken thing in the bright, unforgiving light of the courtroom. He sat there, his face a cold, hard mask, his eyes filled with a powerful, burning hatred. He was a man who had lost everything, a man who had nothing left to lose. But the evidence against him was overwhelming. The cameras in the hotel hallway, the phone records, the notes he had written, the ransom note, the pictures of the children, it was all there. A cold, hard, undeniable trail of evidence that led right back to him. William and Keisha sat together in the courtroom, their hands clasped together, their bodies a silent, powerful show of strength and unity. They had been through so much, and they were not going to let him break them. They were a team, a family, and they were going to get through this. The verdict was a single word. Guilty. The word, a loud, powerful sound in the silent courtroom, was a moment of pure, unadulterated triumph. Gregory's face, which had been so cold and hard, suddenly crumpled. He had lost. He had failed. The man who had spent his life winning had finally, truly, lost. The judge, a kind, older woman with a gentle face, looked at Gregory, and her voice, which had been so soft and gentle, was now a cold, hard thing. She sentenced him to a lifetime in prison with no chance of parole. The man who had been a ghost, a man who had lived in the shadows, was now going to spend the rest of his life in a small, cold, unforgiving box. Outside the courthouse, a sea of reporters, cameras, and microphones was waiting for them. The world was watching. William, his body straight, his face a cold, hard mask, walked out of the courtroom, his arm around Keisha. He had a statement to make, a statement that would change his life, a statement that would change the world. He stood there in front of the world and he spoke. He spoke about justice, about truth, about the power of love. He spoke about the man who had been his friend, a man who had been a monster, a man who had taken everything from him. And he spoke about the woman who had been his love, a woman who had been a stranger, a woman who was now his family. He didn't offer a single apology for his past. He only offered a powerful, unwavering commitment to his future. He wasn't hiding anymore. He wasn't running. He was standing in front of the world, and he was being a man of his word. The public, which had been so quick to judge, was now moved by his honesty. People love a good comeback story, a story of hope and redemption. And this was a story of a man who had been wronged, a man who had been a victim, a man who had found his way home. They were no longer a spectacle, a public joke. They were a family. They were heroes. The media, which had been so cruel and so full of hate, was now so full of praise. William was a hero, a genius, a man who had fought for his family. He was a king, and he was going to get his kingdom back. His company, which had been in a freefall, was now rising. The public, who had lost their trust in him, was now putting their trust back in him. He had won. He had won his company, his reputation, his life. But more than anything, he had won his family. Back at the hotel, Keisha watched the news, her body rigid with a mix of relief and a lingering, powerful fear. She saw William's face on the screen, his face a powerful, determined thing. He was a hero, a man who was admired, a man who was loved. But she knew the truth. She knew the man behind the mask. She knew the man who had cried in her arms, the man who had held her as she cried, the man who was a father, the man who was her love. She just sat there, in the quiet of the room, and she felt a powerful, overwhelming joy. It was over. The nightmare was over. The man who had haunted her life for so long was finally, truly, gone. The fear, the pain, the anger, it all just washed away. She was free. Her children were free. Her family was free. But as the joy and the relief filled the room, a small, dark shadow loomed in the background. In the quiet, dark corners of the world, there were people who were still loyal to Gregory. People who believed in his plan. People who believed in his revenge. They were watching, waiting, their eyes a cold, hard thing. They had lost the battle, but they hadn't lost the war. They had a new leader, a man who was just as cunning and just as ruthless as Gregory. A man who was ready to fight, and he was going to win, no matter the cost. The transition from the hotel to their new home was more than just a change of address. It was a physical step into their new life. William had purchased a beautiful, secluded property on the outskirts of the city, a place with a big yard, a high fence, and a powerful sense of peace. It was a home, not just a place to stay. It was a fortress, a sanctuary, a safe haven where the outside world couldn't reach them. The children's faces lit up when they saw it. The house was a world away from the cramped, cold apartments they were used to. It was a place with big, bright windows, a huge kitchen, and rooms that felt like a fairy tale. They ran through the halls, their small, happy bodies a blur of motion. They chose their own rooms, their small voices filled with a new kind of excitement. This was their home. This was their new life. Keisha's heart, which had been so guarded for so long, felt light and free. She walked through the house, her hand in William's, a powerful sense of peace settling over her. This was what she had always dreamed of. A home, family, a life that was safe and full of love. She looked at William, at his tired, happy face, and she knew, with a certainty that was both terrifying and wonderful, that he had given her everything. In the days that followed, a beautiful, new life began to unfold. William, instead of being at his office, was at home with his family. He had a small, private office set up in the house, a place where he could work, but his real work, his real life, was with them. He was a man who had always been busy, always on the go, but now he was a man who knew what was important. He taught Joshua how to play catch in the backyard, his strong, calloused hands guiding the little boy's small, uncoordinated ones. He built a big, beautiful treehouse for them, a place where they could play and dream. He taught Jada how to plant a small garden, her little hands covered in dirt, her face a mask of concentration. They were a family, a team, a beautiful, imperfect thing that was a powerful and all-consuming love. Keisha watched them, her heart full of a powerful, overwhelming joy. She saw William's patience, his kindness, his unwavering dedication. He wasn't just a father, he was their hero. He was their protector. He was their friend. The old wounds, the pain, the resentment, it all just melted away. It was a memory, a ghost from a past that was so far away it felt like a dream. In the quiet moments, when the children were sleeping, the old flame between them began to burn brightly. They would sit on the couch, a blanket pulled over them, and they would just talk. They would talk about the past, about the years of pain and loneliness, and they would talk about the future, about the hopes and dreams they had for their children, for their family. The awkwardness was gone, replaced by a deep, quiet comfort. They were two people who had been through so much, who had been hurt so deeply, who had found their way back to each other. One night, as they were sitting on the couch watching a movie, William looked at her. His face, which had been so serious, so worried, was now soft and full of a powerful emotional meaning. He reached out and gently touched her cheek, his hand rough but his touch so soft. "I love you, Keisha," he said, his voice a low, reassuring rumble. "I have always loved you, and I will always love you." Keisha's heart, which had been so guarded for so long, felt full and warm. She leaned into his touch, her eyes filled with tears. "I love you too, William," she said, her voice a little choked up. "I have always loved you too." Their life, a beautiful, fragile thing, was a testament to their love, to their strength, to their unwavering faith. They were a family. They were home. But as the sun set on their beautiful new world, a small, cold shadow loomed in the background. The world, which had been so quick to embrace them, was a powerful, unpredictable thing. The media was still watching. The public was still judging. And in the quiet, dark corners of the world, there were people who were still loyal to Gregory. People who had not forgotten. People who had not forgiven. They were watching, waiting, their eyes a cold, hard thing. They had lost the battle, but they hadn't lost the war. The world would not always be a perfectly safe place, and they would have to be ready to fight. The final chapter of their lives began not with a bang, but with the quiet, gentle hum of a peaceful Sunday morning. The house, their fortress of love and safety, was filled with the warm smells of coffee and pancakes. The sun streamed through the big, beautiful windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. A silent, beautiful dance of their own. The past, with all its pain and chaos, felt like a distant nightmare, a bad dream from which they had finally woken up. William was in the kitchen, his body relaxed and his face a picture of pure, unadulterated happiness. He was a man who had everything, but what he truly had was a home, a family, and a love that was a powerful, beautiful thing. He was a man who had been a king in a lonely kingdom. Now he was a man who was just a father, a husband, a person who had found his way home. He looked over at Keisha, who was sitting at the big wooden table, a cup of coffee in her hands, a small, genuine smile on her face. Her eyes, which had been so full of a quiet, terrible sorrow for so long, were now bright and full of a peaceful, inner light. The old wounds were still there, but they were healing. They were a part of her story, a part of her journey, but they were not who she was. She was a woman who had been through so much, a woman who had been hurt so deeply, but she was also a woman who had found her way back to her heart, her family, and her love. The children, Joshua and Jada, ran into the room, their small, happy bodies a blur of motion. They were no longer the terrified, broken children from the street. They were children who were safe, who were loved, who were home. They ran to William, their small, happy bodies a testament to a love that had been lost and found. He picked them up, one in each arm, and he just hugged them. A long, tight hug that was so full of love and a powerful, overwhelming emotion that it felt like it could swallow them all whole. The four of them sat at the table, eating breakfast, their small, happy family a beautiful, perfect picture. There was no more talk of the past, of the pain, of the man who had tried to destroy them. There was no talk of the future, of the unknown, of the world that was still out there, a place that was not always safe. There was just the present. A present that was full of a powerful, all-consuming joy. Later that day, after they had all eaten, they went out to the backyard. The sun was shining, a warm, beautiful thing on their faces. The grass was green, and the air was filled with the quiet sounds of a new day. William taught Joshua how to fly a kite, his strong, patient hands guiding the little boy's small, uncoordinated ones. The kite, a beautiful, colorful thing, took flight, a silent, graceful dance in the wind. Jada, her little hands covered in dirt, was planting flowers, her small face a mask of concentration. She was planting a new life, a new beginning, a new future. Keisha just sat there in a comfortable chair watching them. Her heart, which had been so broken for so long, was now so full, so overflowing with love and a powerful, all-consuming peace. She had her children, and she had the man she had loved for so long. She had everything she had ever wanted. She was home. William came and sat beside her, his body tired but his eyes full of a quiet, peaceful light. He took her hand in his and he just held it. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. The silence was a beautiful, peaceful thing. It was a silence that was filled with a powerful, emotional meaning. It was a silence that said, "We are safe. We are free. We are finally, truly home." The world outside their fortress was still out there, a place of noise and chaos and judgment. But in here, in their home, in their sanctuary, they were safe. They were a family. They were a beautiful, imperfect thing that was a powerful, all-consuming love. The past was a memory. The future was a beautiful, unknown thing. But the present, a quiet, peaceful, beautiful thing, was a testament to their love, to their strength, to their unwavering faith. They were a family, and they were home at last.